Welcome to round 2 of the Ghana National Championships 2021. So this was the first game of the second day of play. I added a few pictures from the event down here so you can check them out. So in this game, I was playing on the black side against a very strong upcoming player, David Aduamah. And this was actually the most annoying game to prepare for beforehand. The reason is my opponent can start with everything. So he can play one e4, he can play one d4, he can play one knight f3, he can play one g3, he can play mostly anything. And one c4. So yeah, it was a bit annoying. I didn't want to prepare setups for every one of those first moves. Of course, since I prepared a repertoire for the tournament, I was already set if you were to play either one e4, one d4, but that was pretty much it. So instead of preparing separate setups for c4, knight f3, and g3, I decided to go for one setup that I could be sure that I can use against either of each of those three moves. And that's exactly what I did. So I decided on this particular setup where I put my pawns on e5, c5, and d6. I fianchetto my dark square bishop over here. I put my knight on e7 and c6, and I castle. And I decided I was going to play the setup against pretty much whatever he opens with. It's a setup that you see a lot in certain variations of the opening. It's called the Botvinnik of the English opening, called the Botvinnik English, where white goes for something very similar, and you basically have a symmetrical pawn structure like that in the middle. And so before the tournament, I basically just made sure that regardless of the move that he starts with, knight f3 or g3 or c4, I can go for that particular setup without him interfering. So he started one c4, and funny story. So the default time for this tournament was 30 minutes. What that means is that if the round starts and you're not there within 30 minutes, you lose the game by forfeit. And that morning, I was delayed by life and traffic, and so I got there with 2 minutes left on my clock for the 30 minutes to be up for me to lose by default, which was a bit of a bit of fortune there. So he started c4, I played c5, going for my setup, and so it was very helpful for me that I had this setup sort of planned and I didn't have to think for the first like 10 to 15 moves. And so he continued knight c3, knight c6, went for knight f3, I played g6 and control my dark square bishop. He went for g3 himself, bishop g7, bishop g2, and then I played e5, committing to that structure. Now he humored me and also went e4. He didn't really have to do this. There are many ways he could have played the structure. Could have played for something like e3 and d4 himself. But after I fianchetto my bishop, I guess it's actually a bit tough to play this. But there was a moment before I fianchetto my bishop where I thought he could go for a very quick e3 d4 before he had put his bishop on g2. That might have been a bit annoying, but he allowed me to sort of get my preferred structure, and he played e4, and I put my knight on e7, d3, d6, castles, and here I was already very happy. One thing, I could save time because I basically didn't have to think for any of these moves. And for two things, I have a slightly favorable version of this structure. It's already like completely equal now. He hasn't really managed to make much use of his opening advantage, and the main reason is because of the position of these knights. So in this structure, the pawns in the center are kind of locked, and so in the middle game you are going to be looking for some pawn play. Because of the nature of the structure, you can play on either side of the board. You can play something like a6, b5, and you can play for f5 on the other side as well. And the exact same plans exist for white as well, because I mean the pawn structure is very similar. So because f4, f5 is such an important idea in this structure, usually the knight does better rather here, right, where my knight is, so that it doesn't impede the move f4, because eventually in this game he's going to want to play f4, I'm going to want to play f5, and so he's going to have to waste an extra move getting this knight out of here before he gets to play f4, whereas I'm already there. I can already play f5. So that little detail kind of equalized the position for me. He continued knight d5, putting his knight into that strong outpost square. I also have an equivalent square here, but I started with h6. So to complete my setup, I want my bishop here on e6. But if I'm going bishop e6 right now, he's going to hit me with the knight g5, where the knight is going to annoy my bishop and I might have to move it. I don't really want to exchange my bishop for this knight. So I started with h6, which is a typical idea. You stop the knight from coming here. There are lines in which the bishop also can make use of that g5 square, so it's just a good move to make either ways. He put his bishop also on e3. Because I don't have my knight on f6, I don't have any similar idea, so he doesn't have to waste time On h3, so I put my bishop on e6. He went queen c1, which was the first slightly odd move. It's normal to form this battery, but I usually do it with queen d2, right? I mean, it makes a bit more sense, and it connects your rooks. I'm not entirely sure why he wanted his queen on the back rank still, because the queen isn't really doing anything on the c file. So maybe slightly better would have been queen d2, but it probably didn't change all that much. But anyways, he does hit this pawn on h6, so my next move, king h7, is fairly forced. And then he went a3, so he understands that he needs to play for these breaks, right? So he goes for a3 before. Again, like I mentioned, f4 is a bit more difficult for him to achieve than for me, so maybe it's wise for him to try and play on the queen side like this. But I responded with a5, and I stopped this idea in this track so that I don't have to worry about it, because again, I'm a bit faster on the king side, but on the queen side, he does have a bit more than me, especially because his knight is already here influencing that square b4. I don't want to allow that break to come in, so I want to force us to play on the king side where I can argue that I'm slightly better. So now he agrees he has to do this, and he goes knight e1 to try and play this f4, and that backwards knight move kind of disrupts his development, that his pieces are no longer connected on the back rank, and can give him some issues finding a square for this guy. So I continued with f5. He wants to play f4 himself, but I'm a bit faster than him. I played f5. He responded with f4, which is the plan that we both want to do, basically. And here we reach kind of a crossroads, and I think this is where I started using time on the clock. And thankfully, because of the prep that I'd done, because I already had the structure in mind, I'd pretty much equalized the 20-minute time advantage that he had from the beginning. So we were kind of playing on level terms now. It's a very interesting position. Black is slightly better, very slightly, because this knight is a bit hasn't really found his home just yet, but the structure is so very symmetrical, right, that there are really just a few differences. These pawns and these pawns are also slightly different, but apart from that, it's not too much difference. Even these knights will probably be symmetrical at some point, so there's not much in it for either side. But the play is very complex and very strategic and very interesting. So the tension between these 4 points is also always very interesting. We could spend a lot of time talking about the various ways you can take there, but I decided to go for e takes f4. My reasoning was that it opens up this dark square bishop on a long diagonal, always a good thing, and it frees up this square if e5 from this knight in some lines. I also thought it was a bit annoying for him to decide how to capture back, because this knight is already on its ideal square. So if he takes back with the knight isn't really doing much here. It's a bit better on d5 than it is there on f4. So, and taking back with the bishop gives me access into this here with my bishop, this diagonal. So I thought it was maybe a bit annoying. He took back with the knight, and so I dropped my bishop back to g8, just avoiding that exchange. And then he went knight c2. So his solution to find a home for this knight is to bring it here to c2. I'm not entirely sure that was the best square for the knight, but it's a bit weird to bring it back to f3, because then I probably would take and leave him with a weak pawn here on e4. So maybe he should try and capture and then bring the knight to f3. Maybe something like that would have equalized. I'm not entirely sure, but he decided to go to c2. And I mean, it's not bad. It's still a very fine move. The knight on c2 controls the square b4. It makes it possible for him to play for that break once again, once he deals with this rook. So I played queen d7, completing my development. My queen basically belongs there on d7, where it can affect this guy, keep this d6 square protected, and remain relevant. He played rook b1, playing very wide. I should have played for the b4 break. And here I think I took a bit of a think, because the b4 break is a bit annoying. I really do not want to allow it, because the thing is, whenever I do, say I play some random move, whenever he does get this breaking, all of a sudden you realize that after a bunch of exchanges, my b7 pawn becomes a huge target, right? He can even exchange here, and all these pieces will come to bear on my b7 pawn, and this will be a bit annoying to defend, really. And I did not want to allow this. So I came up with an idea to kind of stop that b4 break in its tracks, and I went first for knight e5. The point behind knight e5 is to hit this weak pawn on d3, which asks the question of why all the way in the opening he decided to put the queen on c1 instead of d2, because now he was forced to play queen d2 to protect that d3 pawn. Although then it seems that the knight protects him, I'm going to play h5, g5 with tempo. and get the knight out of there. So the d3 pawn was a weak point. And here I played rook a to b8. This was my idea to meet the move b4 with takes and b5 of my own. So I solved the problem of my weak pawn on the b file by pushing it as well. And again, I create this very interesting pawn tension here, where most likely the pawns are all going to get exchanged. And yeah, I was maybe happy that I found this particular solution. It wasn't great, but it was a good practical decision, and I think it made things a bit easier for me to handle. So I'd seen the continuation that he was going to take here, I was going to take there, and he had this very interesting move d4, which he did go for, and it looks very nice. It looks like you get this armada of pawns crashing through the center, and it looks like they can be a bit annoying, but I'd greatly assessed that it wasn't too much of a problem. The move is just knight g4. I hit this guy, and the tempo that I get from the bishop, if he has to move the bishop away, then I just take somehow. I break down this central pawn phalanx. So he decided to take first on d6, so that my queen takes the pawn is hitting my knight, so I have no time for taking this guy. And after my queen takes, the idea was to play e5, and I'd seen this entire sequence before I went for that b5 idea. And again, it looks very natural. I mean, you get connected pass pawns in the center. It looks like a very good decision, but you look at it a bit deeper and realize the pawns are not very mobile, unfortunately. These pawns would be very powerful if they could go down the board, but because of this bishop here on g8 and my knight here controlling this d5 square, because of the fact that this knight is about to get kicked out, so it doesn't really help. It's just this one piece controlling the d5 square, so he can never actually push d5, and so the pawns are actually kind of stuck. And whenever pawns are blockaded well like that, they tend to be not too much of a problem. Whereas on the flip side, I do also have a pass pawn myself now, that can prove to be more annoying than his pawns, although there are two of them. So my queen dropped back to d7, then he played rook fd1, supporting this pawn and then attempting to push it some more. So now I continue with g5, hitting that knight, getting it away from controlling that square d5. Then the knight dropped back to e2. Then I played knight d5, firmly blockading the square, stopping the pawns where they are and threatening this c3 break. So he went knight c3 himself to also try and blockade my pawn and stop my pawn from advancing. But the problem is I had this very nice move, rook b3, and I was very happy when I found this move. Again, the engine points out several nice opportunities. It was a very rich and complex game, so you expect as much. But I think this was also a very good practical decision. Puts a lot of pressure on his blockading knights, so the knight kind of has to go away, and that allows my pawn to go, whereas his pawns still cannot move. So the knight had to take on d5. My bishop took back. Then he exchanged rooks here on b3. The pawn took back, again advancing one rank further up the board. The knight dropped back to e1, and now you see that the problem. I have a passed pawn. He has two passed pawns, but the mobility of mine is causing him a lot of issues, whereas his are firmly blockaded. So I played rook b8, supporting my passed pawn. He played knight d3, controlling the b2 square, attempting to stop my pawn from advancing. Here the engine points out a very nice line. Bishop g2, king takes on g2, then I push b2. The point being that the knight can't take, I think, because this bishop is hit, so the queen would be overworked. And here I go, so he goes rook b1 to try and stop the pawn. Then I go queen b7 check. The king steps back, then my queen enters in on e4 with game ending consequences. Hits this guy, sorry, hits the bishop, hits the knight, so now he can never actually take on b2. And yeah, there's no good response. The best line is actually just to give up material with rook b2, where I take and I win the bishop. So this would have been a crashing way to continue, but I mean, it's very tough to see. I went for bishop f8, a more natural looking move. The idea is, I mean, my bishop is biting on granite here, so to bring the bishop all the way here to support my pawn's advance, which I think was a fairly good decision. Here he decided to trade on d5. My queen took back, then he played rook b1 to try and hold my pawn down. So I continued with my plan, bishop a3. He played h3 to sack my knight out of there, but it didn't really help matters much for him. I took on e3, the queen took back, and I was able to push my pawn to b2. So gradually making progress with my pawn, while still making sure that his pawns make zero progress. But here he tried to also push, so he pushed e6, and here it became very interesting because now he's also threatening to go forward with his pawn, but it's a bit too late, and I really calculated that the move queen e2 was just winning. I hit the rook. The rook is undefended, so it forces him to come back and defend. He doesn't have the ability to push forward with any move like e7 because I take the rook with check. So the queen came back, and then I played the move rook e8, which is what I had seen ahead of time. Attacking this pawn twice, asking him how he intends to defend, while pointing out that he cannot play the natural d4 because the queen would just take for free. So he played knight c5. And here the simplest way to win would have been to play the move queen c4, which I really should have seen. It's not too tough. He hits this pawn, threatens to take with check, and then also threatens to take the knight, after which I will win a pawn when he takes back. Fairly simple, straightforward, and there's simply no good response. If he tries queen d3 to try and hold things down, I just go back here and I hit this guy again and force the queen back, after which I am going to take the knight and win a pawn. So yeah, I should have seen this one, but what I went for was not as good. A similar idea, but I decided to take first on c5. But it's a hugely different position because after he takes queen c4 is not as strong anymore because I don't hit that weak pawn with check, threatening to win his knight. And because I hang this pawn, if I take the pawn, he's just going to take my pawn back. So I decided to take the pawn on e6 with tempo on the queen with my rook, which is what I thought would be winning beforehand. But he played this very good move, queen d1, and all of a sudden my king's position is starting to also look a bit iffy. And once your king starts getting weak, all sorts of issues can rise up on the board. So I had to go king g6 to make sure my king is safe. But that gave him just enough tempo to get back in the game. The engine points out that the move g4 he actually just equalizes for him, and would have led to some sort of perpetual after forcing this diagonal open. But it's a bit tough to see, but not that difficult. He probably would have spotted this if he had more time. Another important detail, by this point he had gotten into some serious time trouble. I was up maybe like 20 minutes on the clock, but he only had a few minutes left. So I was trying to play quickly to try and put pressure on his clock, and it led to a few mistakes coming up. The next few moves are all blunders. So after king g6, he went queen c2, so missing that g4 idea, and now I'm winning again. But then I blundered right back. So now he's threatening to take this guy, and he's also defending this guy. So I need to find a move that either defends this pawn enough, but I can't do that because his pawn controls the b6 square, or goes for his king, because now the king is a bit naked. And I went for the wrong move. I went for the move rook a3, queen a3, sorry. And my point was that I'm hitting this guy, and so that if he's to take, then I take here with check and I'm just winning. I'd calculated the sequence to the end. And if he doesn't take and he goes for here, where he protects this guy and goes like he's going to win this guy on the next move, I calculated this move, rook e3, was actually winning. And the point is that if he takes, I'm going to take this pawn with check, and it's actually just checkmate. Wherever he goes, I mate him with the queen and the rook. So I thought this was a good response. What I had missed was that he can actually go here to h2, and it's a huge difference because now this doesn't come with check. That's like a big deal. And that one move, I mean, he equalizes without too much difficulty. And although he's down a pawn, it's not too difficult to draw because it's a pass pawn. He'll just put his rook behind the pawn and start pushing, and I'll have to waste a bunch of tempi to get that pawn back, during which time would have neutralized the rest of the board. So king h2 would have drawn the position. I was very annoyed I missed this, but fortunately I didn't see it during the game, so I didn't have any time to insult myself for it. But he, I think, spotted it, but he decided to go for something else. Time trouble again was a big factor here. And he actually decided to just go for the move that I talked about first, queen takes b2, which unfortunately is easily losing after I take on g3 with my queen. And yeah, he played queen g2, I played rook e1, the rook takes is forced, queen takes back is forced. And here if you go king h2, I'm going to go queen here, and I'm going to win the pawn back, and I'm going to be up 2 pawns in an endgame that shouldn't be difficult to convert. He even went for the worst queen f1, which makes it much simpler, because after just trading queens and playing king f6, my king is in time to stop that pawn, and I'm just up 2 pawns in a king and pawn endgame. So after a couple of moves, he resigned in this position, and I'd won my second game. So a very tough game. Here the preparation didn't give me like a better position or anything, but it did help me save a lot of time. And in the end, time trouble was kind of the main decider. So I was happy with that. And yeah, I was kind of getting in a row. In tournaments like this, form is very important, you know, get that confidence running. And so 2 out of 2, I was heading into the third game. I'll catch you with that video very soon. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment, drop a like. Happy chessing, and I'll see you later.